let's basically do 6 and 7
Mhm.
and then kind of go from there. I think technically 8 falls into the same too, but it might be too much because it's not as short of a chapter as 5, and we saw what happened
Yeah,
with 5.
8 is so 6 and 7 cover the flood, and then 8 is like picks up at the middle of the flood and then after the flood, right? So that's a good stopping point.
Okay, okay, good.
And we left off with two lineages, one walking with God from Seth, and one opposed to God, running from God into Nod, the opposite of Eden, with Cain after he killed his brother. Chapter 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were very attractive. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, Yahweh said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, for whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah was found in favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Hmm. Let's stop there for a moment.
Sure.
Um, they start multiplying, and God saw that the daughters of men were attractive. No, the sons of God.
The sons of God. So this
So
is,
are
we
those?
briefly mentioned this in the last episode.
Yeah. So the sons of God. This is where it's very confusing if you're a new reader, right? Because when I was reading my old notes, what the heck is it talking about? Sons of gods, you would imagine, is talking about just people that God
Hmm.
created, right? Sons of God saw the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. They took as their wives any they chose. So then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in men forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. So if you're reading this when you've never, like, you don't even know what's going on, that sounds ridiculous, right? Because God creates man, so now we're sons of gods, and then he sees that um, people are attracted to daughters of men, which clearly the distinction here is like you realize something's off, but you don't know what the backstory is because it says sons of God versus daughters of man. You're like, what the heck is going on here? I thought you created men, so now we don't have a backstory. And then you're mad because they're just choosing wives. Doesn't say anything about choosing against their will. There's no rape. Like it doesn't sound like maybe that was just forced. So it just says they're choosing women to bear children with, and then Lord gets mad and just shortens their life to 120 years. You're like, why? What's going on? And then
It
goes over the Nephilim, were on the
it's a
earth in these
wild,
days.
wild passage without, yeah, coming at it blind for sure. Keep going.
Yeah. Then it goes into the Nephilim, were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. So it's not even super clear it's saying Nephilim were the sons of God that it's referring to. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children. It more sounds like Nephilim were there too when this was happening. It's not even saying Nephilim were the sons of God. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And then it says that these men that were born to these women were actually honorable, renowned men. What's the problem, dude?
Not honorable, but renowned, like known,
Renowned
known
is
about. Yeah.
mighty. Renowned is like mighty. It's not negative. Renowned is not negative. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every institution of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So what's crazy about this? It's setting up a stage as if there was evil thing happening, yet I'm failing to see anything evil other than Lord just tripping. Again, from virgin eyes, right? Like, let's say you have no clue, you've never read the book of Enoch, you have no clue what the heck is going on, what Nephilim,
Right.
what sons of God, daughters of men. You're just like, what, dude? Why are you tripping? What's going on here? Like, everything seems pretty fine. And
It's
then, but
interesting.
Noah was different.
Some of the stories in the Bible, or any ancient document, oftentimes will refer to something that's commonly known, and so that section's really short because they just assume everyone knows about it. Oh
But
yeah,
how
and
if it's not even
these were
in
the
the
Nephilim, the
Bible?
ones that everyone knows about, the Nephilim, the giants. Anyway, let's move on. Right.
Let's move
So
on. While we're not going to put that book in the Bible, we're going to just leave it out.
yeah. Enoch helps clarify a lot of this. It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you had some really wild notes in your notebook when you first read this. Is that what you were reading out of, or?
No, I was just, it was some of it is from that because I was just reading it. But so let's go to 6, for example. So, very hard to understand. I thought God created men and women, but here the book is saying sons of God saw the daughters of men. Right? I'm stuck there. This is again years ago. There seems to be an importance to the distinction. For whatever reason, God doesn't seem to like that sons of God are taking wives. I don't see any implication of rape. Then randomly has one line about giants. Okay, I can print 2 visuals with these cryptic verses. One, a brothel type scene with rape, violence, fighting giants, pregnant hookers, children among them, in which case I can understand the disappointment.
Sounds like a
However, however, them becoming mighty man throws everything off in this scene. I don't suppose God was practicing sarcasm. Seems like it might be visual too. Men lived free or carefree, picking wives, having children, and become heroes, living long, and don't know where giants fit in. They're almost viewed by God as godlike, which he doesn't like. So he emphasized that they're not gods, they're flesh, and cuts their lifespan by a lot and destroys them. And then I said I could absolutely run parallels with Davos, self-proclaimed gods who see humans as parasites on Earth, them above it all, and are running efforts to destroy it all the way down to changing the human DNA and playing with human lives based on 126 and 322. God isn't one thing or one being. And then I just go on kind of making the point that if God is multiple things, then, how do we know it's just not a setup of like kind of a experiment? But I don't want to go into, there's a lot, so I don't want to read all of that. But just some raw thoughts from years ago, because again, I had not read Enoch, or I just had no idea what the heck is it talking about. And then I was really pissed because here you are like reading the Bible, this is almighty book, and then it's just that God continuously comes across as kind of a bit needy, jealous, weird, unfair.
I remember reading this for the first time as a teenager and being thoroughly confused and wondering what the hell is going on here. This is really, but also being, as a curious person, fascinated, like, ooh, a mystery. I want to figure this out. And lots of people have felt the same way.
Similar, because
books.
Yeah, because you can clearly see there seems to be a distinction in the minutiae of things, like sons of God. The first thought is, oh, that's just people, because God created men, so these are sons of God. And then but then there's a distinction of daughters of men. You're like, okay, no, there's clearly a distinction. These are godlike creatures, and there's some kind of a mix happening with some kind of creatures that we have no idea what, we have no information about. Then the giants are a single line, while it doesn't make it clear that it's the giants that it's talking about, or well, technically it's not talking about the giants. Giants were the offsprings, not the sons of men.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, sons
Right.
of God.
Right.
Yeah, I'll stop my ranting there.
At the very, very least, what we have going on here traditionally is ritualistic merger of men with demonic spirits. Like that's typically the way this is interpreted. Exactly what that means in a literal sense, we can go in all sorts of fun directions, and I think we will. But typically, this is interpreted as that the sons of God are as in the Septuagint is just translated as angels. So
Uh-huh.
spiritual beings come down. They took whatever wives they wanted, essentially, basically
So
through
why is that
sexual.
demonic then? They're angels.
Well, they're spiritual beings. So demons are
Yeah.
also spiritual beings, right? So in the
Okay.
sense, these spiritual beings took whatever wives they wanted, right? Which implies rape, essentially. And through these spiritual beings, they merged with men. The men raped these women and created these children through this process who became were called giants. And you can interpret it literally as in very, very tall, or, more metaphorically, that they were strong, they were leaders, they led armies, they were men of renown, right? People knew about them. They were mighty men, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Truth,
through
yeah.
warfare generally. They, later on in the Bible, we'll end up meeting Goliath. Goliath is said to be a Nephilim. He is a giant. So they take over land by slaughtering people, right? Um,
Mm.
and that's your basic traditional interpretation and understanding of this. At the bare minimum, we have demonic spirits inhabiting men, raping women, creating children who grow up evil and but powerful through this merger, possibly some sex magic happening. And now you have these powerful men who create warfare and take over things, uh, and those are the renowned men, the giants of spoken in the legends, essentially.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want a more fun interpretation, you pull in things like the stories of the Titans, of actual giants, of big people.
Mm-hmm.
You read the Book of Enoch and you hear about the Watchers, and these are beings or creatures or spirits that are watching the earth, and then they come down, and then they, they mate with men, right? So some sort of hybrid, and this is where you get the fun theories about aliens. It's like, oh, well, are these beings from outer space coming down, from the heavens, and then doing some DNA splicing and creating these powerful human alien hybrids. Um, and you'll find 1,000 videos on YouTube talking about that. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying they're wrong. It's out there. But yeah, you can interpret that in here. But the bare minimum, what's being told here is that the line of Cain is practicing uh, demonic witchcraft, merging with evil spirits, creating powerful warriors who are taking over the land,
And we're
and creating
assuming
a
this
world of
is line
evil.
of Cain because why not Seth?
Um,
Like it's just setting up the stage of what the world is. It's not necessarily saying anything about Cain, or like at this
sure.
point we have the entire world set up, right? There's Seth and all these good ones are there too. Noah, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, right? So Noah is
Right.
the one the Lord favors, but everybody's here at this point. So
Yeah.
we're making an assumption that this is the line of Cain, or does it say
Right.
it?
It's just it doesn't say it directly, but it's implied because Noah is at the very end there, it says that Noah's righteous. He's found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And right before that, God regrets that he made man on earth. He's sad. He's grieving. He's saying they've become evil. Every single thing that they do is evil. There's not even a hint of goodness in any of them. It's just, which would be murder and rape and all sorts of demonic witchcraft and who knows what else is going on. And there's only one family left that's good on the earth, and that's Noah and his family. And so God says, I'm going to wipe out the evil that's
The
on the
stats
earth.
are not to our favor.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting way of looking at it that I try to encourage people to see this story because we all know, if you're in the West, you know the story. The world became evil. God decides to kill all the evil people to punish the world and spares one family. And that's a very Western kind of penal way of looking at punishment, right? Divine punishment. But there's another way to look at this story where if the entire world, if every family and tribe is practicing all sorts of evil, and there's only one good family left, what's going to happen to that family very soon? Right? They're probably going to get murdered and sacrificed to demons. They're going to be gone, and there won't be any good people left on the
They'll
earth.
be
So you can actually
prosecuted.
look at, right. So you can actually look at the story less about God punishing the evil people and more about him rescuing the last remaining good people on earth before they get destroyed by the evil. So this is more of a story from a Christian's perspective of salvation, of saving someone from death, rather than punishing the evil and just saying, "Oh, well, you're good enough. I'll let you live."
Yeah, but then like someone who's let's say an atheist would be like, all right, so what's going on here? You created all this. Are you a terrible parent? Are you a just horrific at this thing? Is this a practice? You didn't know where it's going to go? Like why is it that your own creation, out of all these people now you've created, there's a mess going on and only one family is. Here's the thing, if I see an obnoxious child, that's the parent to blame. That kid wasn't born
Right.
obnoxious. It was turned obnoxious because of lack of parenting. Like this, whatever's going on. It's just whatever's been recorded on this child. It's an empty disk as it starts, and then you record. So parents have a huge role to play what gets recorded and what doesn't. So now I'm going to judge God no different. You're a parent. You just created this entire massive. Maybe you just, decided to bite more than you can chew, but you've created now this massive thing. And out of all that, your own creation, you're so terrible at parenting that just only one family out of all gets
Right.
saved per your own standards.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, doesn't look like God was a very good parent here. If they all went evil, if you had a dozen kids and they were all in prison for trafficking drugs and
You
sex
messed
crimes,
up.
and only one of your kid was decent, people would say, "Man, you messed up as a parent." I don't know how that
Yeah.
one kid ended up being okay. Well, it's fun because
I mean, that's the
I mean, if you
last kid,
notice,
so you can say like, "Wow, it took you that long to get
to
the
figure it
hang of
out.
understanding your own mistakes."
Yeah. Well, to start off, I mean, any response to a story like this or any of these stories about, well, why couldn't God have made it different? The typical response from a theist, Christian or Jew or Muslim, would be that God allows people free will, right? Free will is usually the typical response to the philosophical problem of evil. Why is there evil? Because God allows people to make their own choices, and you can choose goodness or you can choose evil. And there's a long discussion you can have about that. But I think for the time being, that satisfies, at least for this story, that question here. The world became evil because people were given the free will, just like Adam and Eve were given the freedom to choose to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, or not choose it, and they chose it. And
Mm-hmm.
Cain was warned that sin was creeping at his door, and then Cain killed his brother, and God even said, "Hey, what have you done?" And instead of owning up to it and apologizing, he runs off far away from Eden to Nod. And so the idea here is that with complete free will, what do people become, right? And notice we don't have any
But
commandments
he
here yet,
gave them the will.
right? We don't have any commandments or rules of life here yet, right? We don't have the Ten Commandments, and what we'll end up having
Mm-hmm.
after the story is Noah has some commandments given to him about how
Mm-hmm.
to live a good life. But previously here, in the aspect of the story, um, people are just given free will to do as they would. God doesn't say, "Hey, don't do this, don't do this. You should do this,
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't do this." They're just let to run amok. And the moral here is that without any structure whatsoever, what's going to happen to a civilization if you don't have some rules saying, "Hey, don't
Mm-hmm.
kill, right? Don't steal," then eventually everyone's going to turn evil.
Yeah.
And so we finally have the
Okay.
first like laws of God after the flood. God establishes his first laws. Like these are the laws. Don't kill. The laws of Noah. Later on, he gives new laws to Moses.
Oh, well, like, okay, he's God Almighty. He could literally just step in and be like, "Look, guys, I let you run wild. This is getting a little out of hand, very unruly. So you're on timeout. You have 5 years to show me that you deserve to live. So I'm going to mark you with some kind of a, something. Let's color code them. Green is good.
Well, Cain had a mark.
Yellow
They're
is
descendants of
you
Cain.
have a
Yeah.
chance. Huh?
Cain had a mark. They're descendants of Cain, so they
Yeah,
already have some sort of
exactly.
mark on them. Well,
Red,
God
you're
kind of
just
does
gonna
that.
die. Yeah, exactly. So now you have. I'm gonna show you my might, which means I'm God. I can show you right here. I'll in case in case you don't believe me that I'm gonna destroy you. Let me first show you that I can. Then now you have 5 years. Let's see if you can clean your act up. No, no,
Right.
no such thing. It just kind of comes in. It's just like this is out of hand. I'm gonna just destroy you now, and I'll.
Well, well, as we read further, I mean, it kind of actually is
Okay,
like that a
let's
little bit.
let's
So,
okay.
and
Let's read further.
and just to hint at that here, because let's see, it says, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for his flesh; his days shall be 120 years." Now, a lot of people read that to think, "Oh, we're not going to live to be 900 anymore. God shortened our lifespan to 120."
I
Actually,
mean, that kind of checks out
um,
realistically.
what kind of does, and that's why people often interpret it as that. But what it's really saying is that it's 120 years from that moment before the flood. So actually, um, God talks, we'll see, talks to Noah, tells him to build the ark, and there's 120 years from this moment until the flood. And during that time, Noah actually goes out and tries to tell people and warn them to turn back to God. So, well, often we see in these stories, God gives people an opportunity to repent, to change their ways, and gives messengers to say, "Hey, you should, stop being evil, quit being bad boys." And if you don't, there's natural consequences that come of that.
You're saying that 120 years isn't about all of a sudden us living shorter?
Right.
Because it
It's
says, Then the Lord
120 years
said,
from. Mm,
My spirit shall not abide in men forever, which means his spirit should not be in men forever. Up until now, see, this is contradictory. His spirit was in men. I'm seeing this as that's why they were living so long, because they were a bit more godly. For he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. To me, it's just really saying that you're just not going to live as long anymore because you're causing too much mayhem. You don't deserve to be godly. You're going
yeah,
to
I mean
die
that's the way
sooner.
a lot of people have looked at it. I know the Eastern tradition interprets it as, because you can live longer than 120 years. I mean, we've talked about that in the last episode if you do things right. So
Well, but we
usually the
know
Eastern
that
interpretation,
we agreed though that we could perhaps, but then
right,
clearly we don't.
right, yeah, and,
And I think
and
outcome is very
so
important. Like anytime I make analogies, outcome is going to be important. Like I'm going to look at history of different nations and different cultures and what it has brought, including different religions, and where are we now. And I'm going to reflect that back to the book, because obviously these stories have shaped our lives, and hence we cannot
mm,
ignore what it has, what outcome it has yielded. So
and also this could be a situation which is very common where it's "por qué no los dos?" Why can't they be both? you know Perhaps there's some poetry going
a
on there.
dual.
Men's lives are shortened to about 120, and also he's giving men 120 years to change their ways before this flood's coming. And as you and I both know, these type of cataclysm events are natural in the earth's cycle, and science is
Mm-hmm.
finally catching up to this idea that during the pole shifts and the sun's micronovas, we have these cataclysms that change the way that the earth works. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is already set in motion. God already knows about this. And imagine, he comes to the people and says, "Stop being evil. Anyone who's righteous, I'm going to save you from this cataclysm that happens every so often." If
Mm-hmm.
half of them turned their ways, he would have rescued them. But the story is not so much, although it is written in a way that's sound can be easily interpreted as God punishing evil people. I like to see it more from the perspective of God rescuing those who are good from the evil of the world and from the coming destruction that naturally occurs in reality.
Yeah, the thing is, like, when it describes Sodom and Gomorrah, you can see the evil, or you can see what it's talking about. Here, it just really doesn't sound that wicked. It's just It just sounds like God just doesn't like that some things are out of order.
Yeah, it's
Right?
called
Like
so
it's really not talking about any kind of particular destruction or wickedness. I'm not seeing that personally.
in this chapter, yeah, it doesn't go into the details about what the evil was. It just says they were evil. Every single thing they did was evil, and just take it as that. As
Okay.
kind of we mentioned in the previous episode, in the later chapters, when you meet these other tribes that develop, and you see the cannibalism and the rituals that they practice,
That's
it's
understandable.
right. It's taught that these practices were what the people were doing before the flood. That they rediscovered some of these ritualistic magic that would give them knowledge and communion with evil spirits. That this is what everyone was doing pre-flood. Like it was just everywhere. And Noah was the only, and his house was the only people who weren't doing
All right. Let's continue then.
it. Okay,
Noah and the flood.
Noah and the flood. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their ways on earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy with them the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, the breadth, 50 cubits, and the height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring two of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kind, of the animals according to their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, two of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. And take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him.
I think it's funny that it says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. So all right, let's take God's word at its face, right? It's corrupt, it's all violent and all that, right? We don't have a good window. We're just gonna take him at his word. It says to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Did it forget that it was supposed to destroy the earth too? So then he just goes on telling him the exact measurements of a ship to build that, but then he says he's gonna destroy the earth too.
I mean, maybe he originally wanted to destroy the entire earth. Maybe,
Okay, so
you know,
where's Noah going with his ship if he's
but
destroying
because
the
he
earth?
liked Noah, he says, okay, I won't destroy the earth, but I'll destroy everything on it except for, you know, or it just might be just a translation issue here. It's
Yeah, it could
interesting
be.
how God calls
Oh,
everything flesh.
curious
He wants to
actually.
destroy the flesh, right?
Yes.
And right before this, he says he's removing his spirit is removed from the flesh, and so we're seeing the union of flesh and spirit being separated, and the consequence of that separation is that the flesh dies, and the only flesh that exists that is still walking with God, that is still union, is Noah, right? And so you can kind of see this as like a natural consequence of when the spirit and the flesh are separated. Death is what becomes of that.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything particular to say, or we should continue with the story and then
Um,
say?
One thing is what's unique about this flood story compared to others is the design of the ark. I believe it's in Gilgamesh that his ark is like a cube, and some other stories they don't have the specific numbers. But I think Noah's story is the only one in which the architecture of the ark is actually the right proportions for like a balanced ship. Like if you had a cube, that thing would just tumble everywhere, right? It would not be stable in water, especially choppy water. But 300 by 50 by 30 is actually the size of a ship that actually
Oh.
works on the water. So it's, one credit to the biblical one. That at least we have naval accuracy here
So
in this
that
description.
is interesting. The ship, I always want to be a devil's advocate. So the ship, for example, if it's a cube just bouncing around, while it's going to be really tough on the person inside who's just practicing either hamster wheel or or figuring out
Yeah,
how to not get
Gilgamesh's.
car sick or getting nauseous. Um, Besides that, a cube has a higher chance of not sinking in and just kind of bouncing off the waves. But a ship, the wrong thing happens, water gets in, it can start sinking. No.
Oh yeah, I mean at the very, an actual ship length can easily break. But the problem with the cube is that you're just going to be spinning around in circles and tumbling. It's just going to be a
Yeah,
hell of a
so
time.
you basically have to like be an acrobat inside, just kind of like just go with the way we were like when I lived in New York City. We would ride the subway because it's very old and very fidgety. So we would just basically not hold on to anything and just ride the subway because we would just go with the waves. So they would have to do that with the cube, kind of like just extra advanced acrobatics to not get nauseous
Yeah.
and sick. All right. Well, okay.
But before we
Anything
move to the
before we
next
continue?
chapter, just some artistic parallels here, where we have the number three being repeated inside the ark. So we have, I mean, we have Noah's sons. He has three sons, but also inside the ark itself, Noah is instructed to build three levels. Right. So this
Mm-hmm.
is the ark is almost a metaphor for Eden or God Himself, and he's being told to split it into three levels as well. So you have a little bit of hints here of like the Trinity, the idea of three built into the ark itself, that's going to save humanity from complete and utter destruction.
Are you saying are you gonna attach it to Jesus's being 30 or 33 years old? Was he 33 when he died?
Right, 33. Started his 3-year ministry, started it at 30. The number three is repeated all throughout the universe, but especially in biblical stories. But,
Number
it's an
three, number
interesting,
7. There are definitely some numbers that are favored more than others.
yeah, 3, 7, 12, 40. 40 is used a lot.
40, yes, 40
Um,
day and 40 night.
mhm, right, yeah. But there's an interesting element there to the boat. And we see here God ending flesh and every living thing, male and female. We have the duality there. The yin and yang is all coming together. So essentially, duality of, if you want to get really kind of esoteric here, the duality of reality is being placed safely into a boat of trinity of three in order to save it from the chaos, which is water, which has no form. The water is even symbolically used in ancient stories to represent death,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the stories in Greece. But you have an interesting kind of element going on here. You have duality being brought together into a unit of threes, three levels, and from that they're going to be safe from destruction.
Okay.
As thunder claps here.
Oh, that was
In
thunder.
Texas.
It's funny. Okay. All right. So we'll continue then.
Then
Okay.
the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord, Yahweh, had commanded him. Anytime you see
When
Lord
you say,
capitalized like that,
sorry, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Every time you say Yahweh, it's not there. Why do you do that?
So anytime that you see Lord in all caps, what that actually
Uh huh.
is Yahweh in the original scripture. And so
In
because
Septuagint?
Jews and, hmm?
In Septuagint,
Yeah,
or what do you mean?
in the ancient Hebrew scripture, and because it became a practice amongst the Jews to not say the name of God, right? They would say Adonai, right, or He on high. They wouldn't say the name of God. They would just say Lord. So it became a practice to replace Yahweh. If you were to look at the actual Hebrew scriptures, it says Yahweh right there, but it became practice to just
Okay.
say Lord. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, sometimes I throw that in there to just kind of because I feel like it adds a particular touch to the story that's missing when you just say Lord and you're not really specifying Yahweh. Um,
Mm.
but I'll continue. Um,
Okay.
Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah was 600 years old, and when the flood of waters came upon the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Of clean animals, and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, two and two, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the three wives of his sons, and with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to their kind, and all the livestock according to their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, two and two of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. A bit repetitive, but we get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
The, the
There's a
flood
lot of
continued
repetition.
40, yeah. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore upon the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals, and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days.
So in the last section, we talked about the 120. We debated is that is he cutting people's life short to 120, or is he giving them a chance that 120 years later he'll decide? But here it makes it very clear that in 7 days, so in a week, after he tells Noah what to do, gives them instructions, in a week he's going to send rain for 40 days and 40 nights. So the 120, I think for me, in my eyes, this becomes okay, yeah, it was about our age, our years, not necessarily the other theory for me. And then another thing that comes up to me as far as just curious, from the Mediterranean perspective, this obviously makes sense. Like this is supposed to be God ruling, like for all of the earth, not just Mediterranean, obviously. We do have archaeological records that shows that the Black Sea rose by intense degrees, and I don't remember all the proper terminology of that time, but there were a couple of incidents that basically shows that kind of a insane flood could have happened in that region. Now, being a human on this planet, realistically that would remain in that region. The stories are from that region, so that would make sense if it's sounded or felt like worldwide. But then why would the person on this side of the world believe those stories if you put it under rational scientific scrutiny, let's say? Obviously, that Black Sea flood would not be reaching here. So it would not be a global event. It would likely be a event of where the stories come from,
Mm. Well, we
unique to that
know,
place.
right, we know at least in the Middle East, geologically. And I think in the next episode, maybe we can spend some time like going through the science of where we know for a fact that there was at least a flood in the Middle East, in the Levant area, about that time. There was some large flood that happened at least there. that scientists all agree upon. And I mean, you can interpret the story. It clearly says cover the whole Earth, but did it mean that literally, or did it just mean basically everything that you could see? I don't think the interpretation for the moral of the story, you got to interpret it exactly one particular way. But scientifically, we know there was a flood in the area at some point in time. Every civilization talks about this massive flood that basically wiped out everything. We discussed that. But interestingly enough, there are stories of massive floods as far out as Native Americans had stories in some of their creation myths about a flood as well, and all the way out to Asia. In fact, I've got a list here of, and I won't read through it all, but the differences between the Babylonian stories. There's a story of a flood in India. There's Greek stories about Jupiter instructing Deucalion to build an ark. Asia Minor, all over the place. We have, as we talked about, a very similar story about a big flood, and someone built a boat and, survived it, and it wiped
So the
out.
same story.
You have to take the presumption that you have all the records, right? You can always discover an older tablet, and then that changes your entire theory. And that happens in archaeology all the time. There's, theories about entire civilizations, and then some new tablets are found and they realize their whole theory was wrong the whole time, and now they have to redo their theory. I think we could do a whole episode on that. We can really talk about in depth all the different flood stories and how they differ, and the science behind the flood and different theories. I think it would be really fun to do, but probably have to prepare for that one.
Yeah, because I know that I have it in my notes, but I literally just cannot find it because it's in the moment it's really hard to figure out my notes. Apparently either I'm horrific at the labeling them, or I don't know what happened, but I know for a fact, like, I have those archaeological from the Middle East, at least, not the ones you're mentioning. I found it. Sorry. So the flood history, geological and archaeological insights. So Black Sea, it's called deluge. I may be mispronouncing it. Black Sea deluge hypotheses. Geological evidence suggests deluge. Thank you. So Black Sea deluge. Geological evidence suggests that around 7,500 years ago, the Mediterranean Sea breached a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait, causing a massive influx of salt water into the Black Sea. This event would have inundated vast areas and displaced human populations, potentially serving as a basis for the flood legends in the region. With 7,500 years is like exact, perfect type of timing as far as that goes. And then there's Mesopotamian flood evidence. Archaeological excavations in Mesopotamia have uncovered sediment layers indicating significant flood events in ancient times. These regional floods could have influenced the development of the flood story, including in the narrative found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and then the Bible. And then there's also Greek mythologies, the I can't pronounce these names, Deucalion and Pyrrha, tells of a great flood story by Zeus. Say that?
Deucalion. Jupiter instructed Deucalion and his family,
and Pyrrha,
and their ark landed on mountain of Pardisus.
Sent by Zeus. Yeah. And then in the Gilgamesh, the gods decide to send a flood to destroy humanity, but a man named Utnapishtim is forewarned and builds a boat to serve himself, his family, and specimen of all living creatures. This story shares notable similarities with the biblical account of Noah's Ark, oldest known flood myth. And then there's a lot more, but yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, in India, there's a story. Brahma appeared to Manu in the form of a fish, instructing him to build an ark and enter it together with 7 righteous individuals, and tied the ark to the horns of a fish that swam, dragging it for several generations.
Wow, that's very mythical.
All sorts of interesting stories. And when every single civilization talks about a flood, probably it was some sort of flood.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I would love to look at the more from this side of the world stories to see how that matches and how old were they. Like hopefully they
Mm.
would be either same age or older, or not enough where the word would have gotten here, because then I'm not going to believe it. All right. So, I mean, other than what we just said, nothing particularly at this point jumps at me. So he just comes, destroys, and then waters prevail on the earth 150 days. As in, this is 150 days before it starts coming down, I'm assuming, because obviously the whole event took 40 days and 40 nights. And then for the next 150 days, it just start prevailing. Is that what that means?
Well,
Coming down
um,
or settling?
I think what it's saying is, yeah, it's 150 days of water before it started to recede. Because in the next chapter, the water starts to recede.
Okay.
It rained for
Okay.
40 days, 40 nights. And 40 is used often in biblical stories. Some people theorize 40 is just another way of saying many, just lots and lots of
Mm-hmm.
days. There's also some theories that has to do with the mathematics of using the numbers, because there's definitely something going on with the seven pairs and the seven pairs and the seven pairs, right? We have, by reading this correctly, we have seven clean animals, seven unclean animals, and then it
Mm-hmm.
says, um, where we are, and seven birds of heaven, right? So we have three, uh,
Seven
three
birds of
sevens,
heaven. How many? You know. Do you know
seven
those
pairs of
angels?
every type of bird. Yeah. Hmm?
Do you know the angels? Do you know how many are there? You know those Gabriel, Uriel, whatever. Those angels that are in the
Oh,
Enoch. How many are they? Are they seven
that
also,
Enoch
or?
spells out. I don't remember. It's
Ah,
I don't remember exactly what's an Enoch.
there's
I don't think there's any
Gabriel,
like.
Uriel. Hold on. I'm curious now if the, because when it says seven birds of the heaven or something, made me think of, I wonder if there's any
Oh, the angels.
angels. Yeah. Oh, so those angels, it's not just the esoteric thing, because I wasn't sure. Looks like they do appear in Daniel 8 to 9 and Luke.
Hmm.
So appears in Daniel 10, Revelation 12, and Jude. Okay, so how many? Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. So four major ones, and then but then it says likely millions if you just keep going on certain other stories. But four major
Right.
ones. Go ahead.
So there's something I want to point out here. Were you about to say something else, or do you want to hop back into this?
No, no, actually, I don't have much to say about this section. It was
Okay.
pretty self-explanatory to me.
There's an interesting thing that stood out for me here, and that is when describing the animals that are supposed to be going onto the ark. In the previous chapter, we hear the animals of the land, we hear the birds of the air, and we hear the creeping things of the ground, right? Insects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the beginning of chapter 7, funny enough, we had this list of make sure you take seven pairs of each type, and it's listed as clean animals, unclean animals, and birds. But it doesn't mention the insects, the creeping things. So we're given, again, the number three. We're given three sevens, and seven being a holy number. And what's being said here that what I pull out of this is this, it's the first time it mentions unclean animals. And we have
Mm-hmm.
kind of a parallel here with the idea of God saving the unrighteous, saving us humans, unclean people, are allowed onto the ark, even though we are unclean, right? And we're taking the place of insects. Now, insects still go on the ark. It's mentioned later on, but it's not seven. It's not a holy number. You know, they're allowed onto the ark. But there's
But
something
doesn't it
that
say
seems to
creeping
be,
things? Because creeping things
yeah,
are
it says
also
later
insects,
on.
no?
Yeah, yeah. The creeping things are just another way of saying insects, but it doesn't say seven, right? It doesn't apply the seven rule to them. It applies the seven rule to
Mm.
clean animals, unclean animals, and birds, right? And so I think to me, it seems to be indicating this idea of God allowing the unclean animals, which are saving us, even though we're unclean, and being able to take part in that, and the number seven being a holy number, getting onto the ark and being saved from destruction. You know, water is used as, chaos, death. You know, in Greek
Mm-hmm.
mythology, you're dipped into the I forgot the name of the lake, and then you come back out and you forget all your memories of your past life. Right, going into water and coming out is symbolic of dying, and resurrecting. But I think it's interesting. It sticks out to me. We have the three pairs of seven again, and one of them is unclean animals. And the creeping things, the
The,
insects, are not given the number seven. So
yeah,
kind
and
of
then later
maybe
it
I'm reading
says,
into it too much, but you know,
yeah, the number wise, yeah, I mean, I'm not as into that in this particular place. But yeah, we always hear the 7 and the 40 and whatever. I think we can just make one general conversation around it to understand what we think. Why is that? Is that just a habit? Is that like a significant date? Is that, what does that mean? Is it a reset, like 40? Is that a reset? This is why I really want to do a 40-day fast, to just see, I don't know, do I just become wiser, something like, does something profoundly change after the 40 days? But I
I
don't
made
have
it.
enough weight to shed.
Yeah, you need to bulk up first before you do one of those, and I don't think it changed
Yeah.
me that much, but
Although I've noticed that after 10 plus years of fasting now, I honestly just, I might look skinny in that moment of fasting, but it comes right back. I don't lose weight anymore from fasting at all.
mm,
So,
mm,
but the unclean part did stand out to me as well, because you're right, this is the first time we saw it, and it's not necessarily going into what is unclean, because when it was creating the earth, it talked about, beasts and creeping things, as in like a snake would be a creeping thing, right? It's just creeps, and then
maybe a snake.
snake, insects, probably, I don't know, that's what made me think of. And then it says on 21, it says all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth. So the swarming is a new word in there, that it wasn't telling you to bring on swarming things in. So that's interesting too, maybe,
Mm.
but I could be also reading too much into it, because it is so repetitive usually. So when it doesn't repeat or introduces a new word, you wonder, you know.
Right. Yeah, and the Jews were very, very, very picky about, like, if there was one slightly different word, they would have debates for generation as to why is it different this time rather than that time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, which means, what is this unclean all of a sudden being introduced? I mean, knowing their diets and stuff, we know what unclean is. Like pigs would be unclean. But then, how did they decide this? How did they categorize it? I mean, I
Yeah, I
know
think it's
pigs
implied
eat
at the
their
very
own shit,
least.
so that could be one of it.
It's implied at the very least that there was already sacrifices going on with animals, right? And so that there were already at least some rules and understanding of which animals God considered clean and which ones were not clean for sacrifices, right? So you're telling the story to people who are still practicing the sacrificial system. You say clean and unclean animals, they understand immediately what you're talking about. Oh yeah, these animals are okay for sacrifices. These animals are not okay for sacrifices. Um, and
Yeah.
if we want to talk about sacrifices and parasites and how things, certain, meats can actually cause issues with you. If you get a
Yeah.
parasite, it can affect your spirit. It can affect your depression. You can get depressed because you have parasites in you. It
True,
changes your
but
connection to.
it would make sense if unclean means that, as in maybe it's a sick animal, maybe it's whatever. But let's say pork is not going to give you a parasite, but pork is considered an unclean animal. I don't remember if this is what they say, but I know that pigs eat their own shit, so that's disgusting. So that's kind of
Yeah,
creates that uncleanliness.
wild
I don't know if
pigs.
this is their excuse or not.
Almost all pigs have, or at least especially in the wild, trichinosis, which is a parasite that if you don't, which is why you can't eat, rare pork. You got to cook it all the way through, just in case it has parasites in it, because it's so ubiquitous. But I think we can talk more about clean and unclean animals when we get to the sacrificial system later on in,
Okay.
in, in the chapters here.
Okay.
But I'm taking some artistic liberty here in interpreting it, it here in a different light as, um, clean animals, unclean animals, and the birds are all out onto the ark. So.
I mean, unclean animals could be useful for something, but not eating. So that will come up perhaps later.
But I will say the
Okay.
biggest takeaway from this story of the flood, and we'll talk about it more as it goes on. And I mentioned that waters represent death, and chaos. And, going into a water represents dying, going into chaos, losing all sense of order, right? And if you come out of that, you come from the chaos back into order. But what's happening in this story is we have a world that is completely corrupted, according to the story. Evil everywhere. There's only one good family left. And in order to cleanse the earth, God decides he's going to cleanse the earth of its evil. And how does he cleanse it? He puts it into water. And then it comes out of the water, and all the evil's gone. Now, where have we seen that imagery before? What we are seeing in this story is God baptizing the earth to cleanse it of its evil. And that's what this story is.
Hey, it's a good note to end on, but it's a far stretch for me. Very far stretch for me. But it's a good place to end.